Good afternoon, everyone. Dear students, today we will continue reading Chapter 6 from our book Snapshots, The Ghat of the Only World, written by Amitav Ghosh. This chapter is a story written by Amitav Ghosh in memory of his friend, Aga Shahid Ali. Aga Shahid Ali was a famous Kashmiri American poet. He identified himself as an American poet writing in English. After being diagnosed with cancer, Shahid urges the narrator to write about him when he dies. And this is what the narrator did. This is what he writes in the memory of his friend. So after teaching at colleges, after 1975, when he moved to Pennsylvania, Shahid lived mainly in America. His brother was already there, and they were later joined by their two sisters. But Shahid's parents continued to live in Srinagar, and it was his custom to spend the summer months with them there every year. "I always move in my heart between sad countries," he would say. Here we find out that after 1975, when he moved to Pennsylvania, he lived mainly in America. His brother was already there in America, and later on, his two sisters also joined him. But his parents continued to live in Srinagar. This is why Aga Shahid Ali would come in summer months to spend time with them every year. He would say, "I always move in my heart between sad countries." Traveling between the United States and India, he was thus an intermittent but first-hand witness to the mounting violence that seized the region from the late 1980s onwards. Quote, "It was 89, the stones were not far, signs of change everywhere. Kashmir would soon be in literal flames." So traveling between the United States and India, he was an intermittent. He was an intermittent but first-hand witness. Intermittent means not all the time, but whenever he was coming to Kashmir, he was witnessing the increasing violence. He was first-hand witness to the mounting violence. Mounting violence means a rising violence. He was a witness to this rising violence that was happening in Kashmir. Mounting means increasing, especially in a way that makes the situation worse. So as we said, traveling like this between two countries, he was an intermittent. Intermittent means happening sometimes but not regularly or often. He was there to witness this increasing violence that captured the region from the late 1980 onwards. And this is what he writes. "It was 89, the stones were not far, signs of change everywhere. Everything was changing, and Kashmir would soon be in literal flames." The steady deterioration of the political situation in Kashmir, the violence and counter-violence, had a powerful effect on him. The steady deterioration. The steady deterioration means worsening. The process of becoming progressively worse. This was the steady worsening of the political situation in Kashmir, which had a powerful effect on him. It refers to the violence and counter-violence. Counter-violence is violence committed in retaliation or revenge. All this had a powerful effect on him. It affected him in a powerful way. It affected him strongly. In time, it became one of the central subjects of his work. Indeed, it could be said that it was in the writing of Kashmir that he created his finest work. Here, the author also agrees that this was his finest work. Whenever he would be writing about Kashmir, he was actually creating his finest work. The irony of this is that Shahid was not by inclination a political poet. He was not by inclination a political poet. By inclination means by disposition. Inclination is a person's natural tendency to urge or act or feel in a particular way. This was the irony. Irony refers to something that has a different or opposite result from what is expected. The irony of this situation is that he was not by inclination, he was not by tendency a political poet. He was not interested in that. I heard him say once, if you are from a difficult place and that's all you have to write about, then you should stop writing. You have to respect your art, your form. That is just as important as what you write about. This is what Shahid would say. He would say, if you are from a difficult place and if that is all you have to write about, then you should stop writing. Because there are so many things to write about, and you have to respect your art and your form. This is just as important as what you write about. Means this is just as important as the content of what you are writing. Anguished as he was about Kashmir's destiny, Shahid resolutely refused to embrace the role of victim that could so easily have been his. Had he done so, he could no doubt have easily become a fixture on talk shows and news programs. But Shahid never had any doubt about his calling. He was a poet, schooled in the fierce and unforgiving art of language. Although respectful of religion, he remained a firm believer in the separation of politics and religious practice. Anguished. Anguished means having or showing extreme pain or suffering. He was anguished about Kashmir's destiny, about Kashmir's future. But he resolutely refused. Resolutely means in a determined way. He refused. He didn't agree. He refused to embrace the role of victim. To embrace means to accept something enthusiastically. He could have taken that. He could have accepted that role of victim, and that would have been so easy. The role of victim could so easily have been his. But he didn't want to write just about that. And he refused to be a victim. Had he done so, he could no doubt have easily become a fixture on talk shows and news programs. Had he done so means, had he embraced the role of victim, he would have become a fixture. A fixture referring to an event that happens at a regular time and space. He could have easily become a fixture on talk shows and news programs. He could have easily become a person who comes to talk in news programs and on talk shows. But he didn't. Shahid never had any doubt about his calling. He never had any doubt about his vocation. He was a poet, schooled in the fierce and unforgiving art of language. He was a poet, and that was his vocation. He was schooled in the fierce and unforgiving art of language. Fierce means raw, ferocious, in this raw art of language. Although respectful of religion means, although he was very respectful of every religion, he remained a firm believer in the separation of politics and religious practice. He believed that religion and politics should be separated. Shahid's gaze was not political in the sense of being framed in terms of policy and solutions. Means he was not getting himself framed by these terms, policy and solutions. He was a poet, and that was his vocation. That was his calling. Shahid's gaze means his view or look. His look or view was not political in the sense of being framed in terms of policy and solutions. Being framed means being taken as policy or solutions. In the broadest sense, his vision tended always towards the inclusive and ecumenical, an outlook that he credited to his upbringing. In the broadest sense means in the most wide sense, his vision or view tended always towards the inclusive and ecumenical. His vision, his view tended. Tended towards means his views inclined or were going in that particular direction. Towards the inclusive means all inclusive, including all the items. And ecumenical means involving or uniting members of different religions. This was his view, and this was an outlook that he credited to his upbringing. Outlook refers to person's point of view or some general attitude to life. This was an outlook that he credited, that he acknowledged or attributed to his raising, to his upbringing. He was brought up to consider that all people are same, that there is no difference in religion, all inclusive and ecumenical. He spoke often of a time in his childhood when he had been seized by the desire to create a small Hindu temple in his room in Srinagar. He was initially hesitant to tell his parents, but when he did, they responded with an enthusiasm equal to his own. It is said that Aga Shahid Ali often spoke of a time in his childhood when he had been seized by the desire. It means he was taken by the desire, or he had this burning desire to create, to make a small Hindu temple in his room in Srinagar. And he was initially hesitant. At the beginning, he was hesitant. He was slow to act or proceed. It means he was reluctant. He was reluctant to tell his parents at the beginning, but when he did tell them, they responded, they replied with an enthusiasm equal to his own. They were equally enthusiastic about his idea. So his mother bought him murtis and other accoutrements, and for a while he was assiduous in conducting pujas at this shrine. After this, his mother bought him murtis and other accoutrements. Accoutrement means things that are needed for an activity, for puja. So for a while, he was assiduous. Assiduous means taking great care that everything is done as well as it can be. This was a favorite story. Means he loved this story. And he would say, whenever people talk to me about Muslim fanaticism, I tell them how my mother helped me make a temple in my room. Fanaticism refers to very strong or extreme religious or political beliefs that make someone behave in an unreasonable way. And we know that fanaticism can be of any religion. This is the story that Aga Shahid Ali would tell whenever someone would ask him about Muslim fanaticism. He would say, I tell them how my mother helped me make a temple in my room. I once remarked to Shahid that he was the closest that Kashmir had to a national poet. He shot back, a national poet maybe, but not a nationalist poet. Please, not that. A national poet, national means relating to a nation. Nationalist means patriotic. Oxford definition of nationalistic is having or expressing strong identification with one's own nation and vigorous support for its interests, especially to the exclusion of the interests of other nations. That is why Shahid prefers national, which means relating to a nation, rather than nationalist or patriotic. In the title, Poem of the Country Without a Post Office, a poet returns to Kashmir to find the keeper of a fallen minaret. Earlier, we have mentioned that one of Shahid's works, The Country Without a Post Office, was actually a poem. The poem originally called Kashmir Without a Post Office. It was published as a title poem in The Country Without a Post Office. Taking its impetus from the Kashmiri uprising, which led to political violence and closed all the country's post offices for several months, this long poem is considered one of his masterpieces. In the book, he envisions the devastation of his homeland, moving from the realm of the personal to an expansive poetry that maintains an integrity of feeling in the midst of all this political violence and tragedy. Nothing will remain. Everything's finished. I see his voice again. This is a shrine of words. You'll find your letters to me, and mine to you. Come, son, and tear open these vanished envelopes. This is what he writes. A poet returns to Kashmir to find the keeper of a fallen minaret. Keeper of the fallen minaret, minaret means a tall, thin tower near a mosque from which Muslims are called to pray. And this is what he writes. Nothing will remain. Everything's finished. I see his voice again. This is a shrine of words. Shrine is a religious place built to remember a particular holy person or event. Aga Shahid Ali says this is a shrine of words. You'll find your letters to me and mine to you. Come, son, and tear open these vanished envelopes. We know that at that time all the post offices in Kashmir were closed. It was not possible to send letters. This is an archive. I found the remains of his voice, the map of longings with no limit. He says, this is an archive. Archive means a collection of some records. This is an archive. I found the remains of his voice. That map of longings. Longing means desiring or yearning. The map of longings with no limit. In this figuring of his homeland, he himself became one of the images that were spinning around the dark point of stillness, both Shahid and Shaheed, witness and martyr, his destiny inextricably linked with Kashmir's, each prefigured by the other. The narrator says that in this figuring, in this thinking and considering of his homeland, he himself became one of the images that were spinning around. To spin around means to turn around quickly. He himself became one of the images that were spinning around the dark point of stillness. There was this one dark point of stillness, and he himself also became one of the images that were spinning around this dark point of stillness. This might refer to the political violence in Kashmir. So both Shahid and Shaheed, Shahid meaning a witness and Shaheed means martyr. Both Shahid and Shaheed, witness and martyr. He was, as we remember, witnessing the violence as well. And martyr. Martyr means someone who suffers or is killed because of their religious or political beliefs. He was both a witness and martyr. His destiny inextricably linked with Kashmir's. Inextricably means unable to be separated. Each prefigured by the other. Prefigured means to be an early indication of or version of something. It was all very much connected. It was so joined together you could not divide it. And Shaheed, being a Kashmiri and being a witness to this violence, he was also a part of this, as he says, dark point of stillness. His destiny was inextricably linked with Kashmir. It was so linked with Kashmir, it was unable to be separated. And, as he said, each prefigured by the other. They were overlapping. I will die in autumn in Kashmir, and the shadowed routine of each vein will almost be news. The blood censored for the saffron sun and the times of rain. This too is from his poem. I will die, he says, in autumn in Kashmir. He actually wanted to die in Kashmir. And the shadowed routine of each vein will almost be news. The blood censored. Here we can also see that many things were censored. He says, the blood censored for the saffron sun and the times of rain. Among my notes is a record of a telephone conversation on 5th May, the day before he had gone to the hospital for an important test, a scan that was expected to reveal whether or not the course of chemotherapy that he was then undergoing had had the desired effect. All other alternative therapies and courses of treatment had been put off until this report. Earlier we have read that Aga Shahid Ali said once, "What I say is, why can't you be happy with the cuisines and the clothes and the music and all these wonderful things? At least," he said, "here we have been able to make a space where we can all come together because of the good things." And thinking about Kashmir and witnessing the violence was of a great deal for Shaheed. The narrator continues saying that among his notes is a record of a telephone conversation on 5th May, the day before he had to go to the hospital for an important test. There was a scan that was expected to reveal or show or disclose whether or not the course of chemotherapy that he was then undergoing had had the desired effect. Now Shaheed had to go to the hospital. He had to make a scan, and this scan was supposed to show whether the chemo that he was then undergoing had the wanted effect. Was it effective? All other alternative therapies and courses of treatment had been put off. All the other treatments were put off. They were stopped. They were delayed to a later time. The scan was scheduled for 2:30 in the afternoon. I called his number several times in the late afternoon and early evening. There was no response. I called again the next morning, and this time he answered. There were no preambles. So this scan was scheduled for 2:30 in the afternoon, and the narrator had called his number many times. But there was no reply. He called again the next morning, and this time he answered the phone. There were no preambles. There were no introductions. Preamble is an introduction to a speech or piece of writing. So there was no beating around the bush. He said, "Listen, Amitav, the news is not good at all. Basically, they are going to stop all my medicines now, the chemotherapy and so on. They give me a year or less. They'd suspected that I was not responding well because of the way I look. They will give me some radiation a little later, but they said there was not much hope." This is the news his friend gives him. He tells him the news is not good at all. Basically, they will stop all the medicines, the chemo and everything else, and they are giving him a year or less to live. They had suspected that he was not responding well of the way he looked, so they will give him some radiation a little later. Radiation is another way of treating cancer, but they said that there was not much hope. Dazed, staring blankly at my desk, I said, "What will you do now, Shahid?" Dazed means confused, very confused and unable to think clearly. Dazed, staring blankly means expressionless way or empty look. He was staring blankly at his desk, and he asked him, what is he gonna do now? Shahid says, "I would like to go back to Kashmir to die." His voice was quiet and untroubled. "Now I have to get my passport, settle my will, and all that." Here, Shahid says that he would like to go back to Kashmir to die. His voice was quiet and untroubled. Untroubled means unworried. He says, "Now I have to get my passport, settle my will, and all that." Will is a legal declaration of person's wishes regarding the disposal of his or her property after death, especially. So he said, "I have to get my passport, settle my will, and all that. I don't want to leave a mess for my siblings." He didn't want to leave a mess for his siblings. Means anything unclear or untidy regarding the documents. But after that, I would like to go to Kashmir. It's still such a feudal system there, and there will be so much support. And my father is there too. Anyway, I don't want my siblings to have to make the journey afterwards, like we had to with my mother. Shahid says that he would like to go to Kashmir. He said that he would like to die in Kashmir. And he also mentions that he doesn't want it to get messy and uncomfortable for his siblings. After that, he says, "I want to go to Kashmir." It is still such a feudal system there. Feudal refers to something outdated and old-fashioned. And he says there will be so much support there. and his father is there too. Anyway, he says, I don't want my siblings to have to make the journey after that, like we had to do with my mother. So, presumably, their mother had passed away and they had to make some long journey. Shahid doesn't want this for his siblings. He wants to die in Kashmir. He wants to go back to Kashmir to die. Later, because of logistical and other reasons, he changed his mind about returning to Kashmir. He was content to be laid to rest in Northampton, in the vicinity of Amherst, a town sacred to the memory of his beloved Emily Dickinson. Later on, although he wanted to go to Kashmir, because of some logistical and other reasons, he didn't. He changed his mind. Logistical means relating to the process of planning and organizing to make sure that the resources are in the places where they are needed, so that some activity or process happens effectively. So because of some logistical and other reasons, it could have been an air ticket or passport or any other thing, he changed his mind about returning to Kashmir. He was content, he was pleased to be laid to rest, means to be buried in Northampton, in the vicinity. Vicinity means the area around the place, close by Amherst, a town sacred to the memory of his beloved Emily Dickinson. This town was sacred to the memory of his beloved Emily Dickinson. Beloved means dearest or a loved one. But I do not think it was an accident that his mind turned to Kashmir in speaking of that. The narrator says, I don't think that it was an accident that when he would speak of that, he would remember Kashmir. Already in his poetic imagery, that Kashmir and Shahid had become so closely overlaid as to be inseparable, like old photos that have melted together in the rain. The narrator says that already in his poetic imagery means a vibrant and vivid form of description that appeals to readers' imagination and senses. So through this poetic imagery that he would use, that Kashmir and Shahid, they became so closely overlaid. Overlaid means if a sound, smell, taste, or feeling is overlaid with another one, enough of the other one is added to be noticeable. They were all overlaid together and inseparable, not being able to separate them, like old photographs that have melted together in the rain. This is what he writes. Yes, I remember it. The day I'll die, I broadcast the crimson. So long ago of that sky, its spread air, its rushing dyes, and the piece of earth, bleeding, apart from the shore, as we went on the day I'll die. Post the guards, and he, keeper of the world's last saffron, rode me on an island the size of a grave. On 2 yards, he rode me into the sunset, past all pain. On everyone's lips was news of my death, but only that beloved couplet broken on his if there is a paradise on earth, it is this, it is this, it is this. In this poem, Aga Shahid Ali talks about his death. He says, yes, I remember it, the day I'll die. I broadcast the crimson. To broadcast means to disperse or scatter. and crimson refers to rich, deep red color inclining to purple. And he tells it in an interesting way. He says, I remember the day I will die. I broadcast the crimson. I disperse this rich crimson, this rich color. So long ago of that sky, its spread air, its rushing dyes, and the piece of earth bleeding. So he is explaining his death. He is already there in the sky and in the air, in the rushing dyes and in the earth. He says, bleeding apart from the shore, as we went on the day I'll die. They were leaving, that is why he says, apart from the shore. Post the guards, and he, keeper of the world's last saffron, rowed me on an island the size of grape. To row means to cause the boat to move. He moved him in a boat on an island, and the island was the size of a grape, very small island. World last saffron presents an image of a fast fading Kashmir, and it depicts the transient nature of time and space for the exile. He continues saying, on 2 yards he rowed me into the sunset, past all pain, means there was no more pain. On everyone's lips was news of my death. Everyone knew that he has died, but only that beloved couplet broken on his. Couplet refers to a pair of successive lines of verse, typically rhyming, and of the same length. This was this couplet that he says that it is only this couplet that broke on his. If there is a paradise on earth, it is this, it is this, it is this. This was the only thing that mattered, that this was a paradise. If there is a paradise on earth, it is this, it is this, it is this. The last time I saw Shahid was on 27th of October at his brother's house at Amherst. He was intermittently able to converse, and there were moments when we talked just as we had in the past. So this was the last time the narrator had seen the author, on 27th of October at his brother's house. He was intermittently able to converse. Intermittently means at irregular intervals, not steadily or continuously. So sometimes he was able to converse, he was able to engage in a conversation. And there were moments when they talked just as we had talked in the past. He was aware, as he had long been, of his approaching end, and he had made his peace with it. We know that Shahid is diagnosed with cancer, and he was aware of it, as he had long been aware of it and of his approaching end, so he made peace with it. I saw no trace of anguish or conflict. Surrounded by the love of his family and friends, he was calm, contented, at peace. So Shahid was in peace. He was at peace. He knew his end is approaching. The narrator says, I saw no trace of anguish or conflict. Anguish means extreme pain or distress. There was no conflict, there was no sign of distress or pain. He was surrounded by the love of his family and friends. He was calm, contented means pleased, and he was at peace. He had said to me once, I love to think that I'll meet my mother in the afterlife, if there is an afterlife. I had the sense that as the end neared, This was his supreme consolation. The narrator said that his friend would tell him. He told him once that he likes to think that he will meet his mother in the afterlife, if there is afterlife, the life people believe exists after that. And he continues by saying that he had the sense that as the end neared, as the end was approaching, this was his supreme consolation. This was his supreme comfort. Consolation means something that makes someone who is sad or disappointed feel better. This was his supreme consolation, a comfort that he will meet his mother after he dies. He died peacefully in his sleep at 2 a.m. on 8th of December. Now, in his absence, I am amazed that so brief a friendship has resulted in so vast a void. The narrator says that now, in his absence, now when he is gone, he himself is amazed, is astonished that so brief, so short a friendship has resulted in so vast a void. A void is a feeling of unhappiness because something or someone is missing. So the narrator says that he is amazed that such a brief friendship can create such a huge void and emptiness. Often, when I walk into my living room, I remember his presence there, particularly on the night when he read us his farewell to the world. I dream I am at the ghat of the only world. The narrator concludes this chapter by saying that often, when he walks into his living room, he remembers his presence there. He remembers his friend there, particularly on that night when he read them his farewell to the world, his final goodbye. I dream I am at the ghat of the only world. We could say that there are two main values that Aga Shahid Ali displays. One is the value of acceptance in the dealing with the disease and eventually death, which gives him strength to deal with a difficult situation. He just accepts the fact that he is sick and that he will have to deal with this difficult situation. The other value displayed by Shahid is courage. He doesn't get depressed after finding out that he has a year or so to live. Moreover, he keeps himself busy by arranging parties and inviting his friends, relatives, poets, and students to his home. By surrounding himself with dear and loved ones in a cheerful atmosphere, he doesn't get, as he says, time for negative thoughts or time to get depressed. He faces his struggles joyously and lives his remaining days to the fullest. Dear students, I hope you like the story about Aga Shahid Ali. This is all for today. Have a nice day and see you soon.